Think back to the sound of a dial-up modem, that screeching static noise that used to mean you were leaving the physical world for a few minutes. For a whole generation, that sound wasn't just technology. It was the sound of a door opening between two completely different realities. Millennials were born right at the turn of the world. They are the only ones who really remember what it was like before the screen took over everything. Between 1981 and 1996, the world was quietly moving from analog to digital. It was a strange, split-screen childhood. Life started offline, in the dirt and on bicycles, but adulthood arrived entirely online. They grew up straddling two different worlds, and that shapes everything about how they see the world today. But here's what's interesting. The world they were promised as kids wasn't the one they actually inherited. If you grew up in the 80s or early 90s, there was this incredible sense of optimism in the air. Classrooms were bright and colorful. Saturday morning cartoons were loud. School assemblies were almost entirely focused on self-esteem. Parents at the time really believed that the future could be managed. They thought that if they provided enough structure and enough encouragement, their kids would be unstoppable. The truth is, this was the first generation raised with constant supervision. Think about the seatbelts and the bike helmets. Think about the permission slips and the scheduled playdates. Parents were watching closely. They were checking in often. They were trying to catch mistakes before they even happened. It was a childhood wrapped in bubble wrap, designed to keep the world from leaving a mark. And for the first time, kids were being taught that their feelings actually mattered. Adults started asking how they felt, not just what they did. Validation became a standard part of growing up. It wasn't just about the grades, it was about the effort. This was the famous era of the participation trophy. People like to joke about those trophies now, but at the time they represented a specific message. The message was confidence first, achievement second. But here's the thing. While they were being told they were special, the world was quietly shifting under their feet. The internet arrived, but it arrived slowly. It started with AOL chat rooms and MySpace pages. At first it felt optional. It was a toy. It was a place to play, not something that consumed every waking second of your day. Then everything changed. For many millennials, the end of innocence wasn't a slow process. It was a single morning. September 11th, 2001 is a core memory for this generation. They watched the towers fall from their school classrooms. Suddenly, the world didn't feel like a managed, safe place anymore. Safety stopped being a guarantee and started being a memory. Yet, the instructions for life stayed the same. They were raised to believe that education was the only answer to everything. College wasn't just a choice. It was sold as a mandatory requirement for a stable life. Student loans were normalized because the debt seemed worth the promised reward. Higher education felt mandatory, like the next logical step on a path that had been paved for them since birth. But when they finally stepped out into the world, the promise broke. Imagine graduating into the collapse of 2008. You did everything right. You got the degree, you took the loans, and then the jobs just disappeared. The degrees lost their value almost overnight. The path that was supposed to be a straight line turned into a dead end. This is where the hustle comes from. When stability vanished, millennials had to learn to assemble a life piece by piece. Freelance work, side gigs, unpaid internships. This wasn't a choice. It was survival. Stability wasn't something you found anymore. It was something you had to build yourself out of scraps. And here is where the psychology gets heavy. Because they were raised to find meaning in everything, work became more than a paycheck. Identity and work became completely entangled. If a job felt empty, it didn't just feel like a bad job. It felt like a personal failure. The work had to have purpose, or the struggle felt pointless. The truth is, this struggle became visible to everyone. The rise of social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, meant that life was suddenly on a stage. Life became visible to the whole world. Comparison became a constant, 24-hour-a-day experience. Success on a screen looks curated and effortless, which makes your own struggle feel even louder. This created a kind of background noise for the millennial mind. It is a chronic, steady state of anxiety, fueled by economic pressure and digital comparison. But here's what we often get wrong about this. People look at delayed milestones and think it's about a lack of maturity. They see marriage, homeownership, and children arriving later, or not at all, and they call it a choice. The reality is that these milestones arrived late by circumstance, not by preference. It's the result of graduating into a crisis and carrying the weight of the debt that was supposed to save you. Because of this, trust has shifted. Millennials have watched banks fail, they have watched government stall, They have watched corporations downsize without a second thought. So they stopped trusting institutions. They shifted their loyalty away from the system and toward their peers and their communities. They will leave a job in a heartbeat if it conflicts with their personal values. To them, meaning matters more than tenure. They would rather be true to themselves than loyal to a company that might not be loyal back. Now, they are the ones becoming parents. And they are parenting exactly the way they wish they had been parented. They emphasize mental health. They emphasize open communication. They are raising kids with an emotional awareness and a flexibility that simply didn't exist a generation ago. There's a term for this: digital natives, emotional immigrants. They adapted to the digital world, but their hearts are still rooted in that analog childhood. They are the only ones who remember what it was like to be truly bored. Yet, they live in a world of constant, never-ending stimulation. If you look at the emotional core of this generation, you see a paradox. They want security, but they've been trained to expect instability. They want meaning, but they live in constant fear of burnout. They were raised to believe they could change the world, and then they were blamed when they struggled just to survive it. People like to call them weak or fragile, but that isn't the whole story. The reality is they are just overloaded. They are carrying student debt, the trauma of economic collapse, and the weight of being the first generation to live under total digital visibility. But here's the most important part. Despite the disappointments and the broken promises, they still believe. They don't trust the systems blindly anymore, but they still think those systems can be better. It's a quiet kind of belief, but it's there. They are the transition generation. They are the bridge between the world that was and the world that is becoming. They are the ones who have to translate between two eras that don't always understand each other. They remember the silence of a house before the internet, and they understand the noise of a world that never sleeps. Maybe being the bridge is the most important job of all. It's not an easy place to stand, but there is a certain kind of strength in knowing how both sides of the river look. Think about that next time you hear that old dial-up sound in your head. It wasn't just noise, it was the beginning of a journey that hasn't ended yet. And maybe, just maybe, we're finally starting to understand where it's leading. If this resonates with you, or if you remember that transition yourself, take a second to think about what you've carried across that bridge. It is a lot, and it is okay to admit that. It's okay to realize that being overloaded isn't the same thing as being weak. It is just what happens when you are the ones tasked with carrying the past into the future.